The Thinking Machine, Jensen Huang, Nvidia and the world's most coveted microchip. Summary. This book is not just about technology. It's about vision, risk, and persistence. Witt takes us through the story of Jensen Huang, the co-founder and CEO of Nvidia, and how a small graphics company transformed into the backbone of the AI revolution. At its heart, it's a story of how chips meant for video games ended up fueling self-driving cars, supercomputers, and artificial intelligence. It's also a look into Huang's personality, his brilliance, intensity, and sometimes intimidating leadership style. Chapter 1. Humble Beginnings. Jensen Huang's story begins far away from Silicon Valley in Taiwan. Born in 1963, Huang grew up in a time when Taiwan itself was still developing and opportunities seemed limited. His family eventually made the brave decision to move to the United States, hoping to find better education and opportunities for their children. But life in America wasn't instantly easy. Jensen was sent to live with relatives in Kentucky at a young age, where he struggled to adjust. Imagine being a boy who barely spoke English, suddenly placed in a new world where you stood out as different. Jensen often faced teasing, isolation, and the natural difficulties of trying to blend into an unfamiliar culture. Yet these challenges planted the seeds of resilience that would later define his leadership. His parents, like many immigrant families, emphasized education and discipline. They believed that hard work was the only way their children could climb the ladder of success in America. Jensen quickly learned that intelligence alone wasn't enough. You needed persistence, focus, and an almost stubborn refusal to give up when life became tough. From a young age, Jensen displayed a sharp curiosity for machines and systems. He loved understanding how things worked, whether it was electronics, computers, or the logic behind engineering. In school, while others sometimes underestimated him, Jensen quietly sharpened his problem-solving skills. By high school, he was excelling in math and science, the universal languages that required no translation. But what stood out most wasn't just his intelligence, it was his drive. Many students were content with doing just enough to pass, but Jensen had an inner fire. He wasn't the loudest in the room, but he was the one who kept going when others gave up. Later, Huang went on to study electrical engineering at Oregon State University. It was here that he started to dive deeper into the world of chips and processors. At a time when the personal computer industry was taking its first big steps, Jensen realized this was more than just technology. After completing his undergraduate studies, he pursued further education at Stanford University, one of the top places for tech innovation. Being in Silicon Valley during this time was like being in the middle of a gold rush, except the gold wasn't metal. It was semiconductors and software. The industry was booming and brilliant minds were everywhere. Jensen didn't come from wealth or privilege. He didn't have family connections in tech. What he had was determination, discipline, and vision. These qualities set him apart and would soon guide him to take the bold leap of starting a company that would change the world. The chapter sets the tone. Huang's childhood wasn't a smooth path of success, but rather one filled with challenges that shaped his character. He learned early that life doesn't hand you victories, you earn them. Every obstacle became fuel for his ambition. And by the time he entered the tech world, he carried not only technical skills, but also a fighter's mentality. Chapter 2: Birth of Nvidia. The early 1990s were a turning point in the technology industry. Personal computers were becoming household items. The internet was just starting to grow. And video games were moving from simple pixelated screens to more immersive experiences. Behind the scenes, however, there was a silent war happening: the battle of chips. Computer processors, CPUs, were advancing quickly, but they had a limitation. They were designed to handle a wide range of general tasks, not highly specialized jobs like rendering complex graphics in real time. At this moment, a new need was emerging: graphics acceleration. If computers could display realistic 3D graphics, games, movies, and even design software would change forever. This was the moment Jensen Huang decided to make his move. After working at established companies like LSI Logic and AMD, he had gained enough knowledge to see where the industry was heading. He knew that traditional CPUs alone would not be enough for the computing needs of the future. A new kind of processor, a graphics processing unit, or GPU, was the missing piece. In 1993, at the age of just 30, Huang co-founded Nvidia with two other engineers, Chris Malachowski and Curtis Preem. Unlike many startup founders, Huang didn't start Nvidia out of a garage or college dorm room. It was launched with a clear technical vision: to build chips that could handle parallel processing and revolutionize computer graphics. The name Nvidia itself reflected ambition. The NV stood for next version, symbolizing progress, and IDEA came from video. Together, Nvidia represented next-generation video technology. But starting a chip company was not for the faint of heart. The semiconductor business was capital-intensive, highly competitive, and unforgiving. Giants like Intel and ATI, later acquired by AMD, were already fighting for dominance. For a small startup like Nvidia, the odds of survival were slim. Jensen Huang, however, brought something different to the table: a unique blend of engineering expertise, business acumen, and relentless drive. He wasn't just a dreamer, he was a strategist. From day one, he insisted Nvidia had to aim high, even when resources were limited. One of Nvidia's first projects was the NV1, an ambitious attempt to combine graphics, sound, and input processing into one chip. On paper, it looked revolutionary. But in reality, it was too complex and didn't align well with gaming industry standards. The NV1 flopped in the market, and for many startups, such a failure would have been the end. Yet, Huang refused to let Nvidia die. Instead of panicking, he treated the NV1's failure as a learning experience. He pushed his team to regroup, focus, and double down on what they did best: graphics processing. His leadership style, often tough, demanding, and unyielding, became a defining factor in Nvidia's survival. Investors were nervous, competitors were circling, and the pressure was immense. But Huang never allowed doubt to creep into Nvidia's culture. He was known to rally his engineers late into the night, pushing them to believe that the next chip could succeed. His confidence became contagious, and it kept Nvidia alive when logic said the company should fail. By the mid-1990s, Nvidia was preparing to release a new product that would change its fortunes: the Riva series of graphics cards. Unlike the NV1, these were focused, efficient, and aligned with industry standards. The gamble was about to pay off. This chapter highlights Nvidia's birth, not as a smooth journey, but as one filled with risk, near failure, and relentless determination. Huang's vision and refusal to quit set the stage for the company's rise. Nvidia wasn't just another chip startup. It was an underdog preparing to rewrite the rules of computing. Chapter 3: The Struggle to Survive. Every great company has a period where survival feels almost impossible. For Nvidia, that moment came in its early years, after the shaky launch of its first products. The company had ambitious goals, but ambition alone does not guarantee survival in the cutthroat world of semiconductors. By the mid-1990s, Nvidia was facing a harsh reality. The competition was fierce. Established giants like Intel, ATI, and 3DFX were already well ahead. These companies had stronger financial backing, deeper manufacturing partnerships, and a loyal customer base. Nvidia was the newcomer, the outsider, trying to prove that its vision mattered. The NV1 chip, as mentioned earlier, had flopped. Instead of revolutionizing graphics, it confused the market. Gamers didn't buy it in large numbers, and developers didn't adopt it widely. Nvidia was bleeding money, and investors were losing patience. For many young startups, one failed product is enough to close the doors permanently. But Jensen Huang was not the kind of leader to surrender. He understood that setbacks were part of innovation. Instead of being defeated by the NV1's failure, he treated it like a lesson in strategy. The main mistake Nvidia made was trying to do too much at once. The NV1 attempted to combine multiple features, graphics, sound, input, into a single chip. In theory, this was brilliant, but in practice, it made the product too complex and incompatible with industry standards. So, Huang shifted Nvidia's focus. He instructed his team to put all their energy into one thing: graphics performance. Nvidia would no longer chase side features or distractions. The company's mission would be to create the fastest, most powerful graphics chips in the world. Still, this was easier said than done. Nvidia was constantly short on money, and the cost of designing and manufacturing chips was astronomical. One mistake in chip design could waste millions of dollars. To make matters worse, competitors were aggressive, racing to release better products every year. Jensen Huang became known during this period for his relentless leadership style. Employees often described him as intense, someone who demanded absolute focus and effort. Late-night meetings, long working hours, and high pressure became the culture at Nvidia. Some found it exhausting, but others were motivated by Huang's belief that they were working on something transformative. What kept Nvidia alive during these struggles was its ability to adapt quickly. Unlike larger companies that moved slowly, Nvidia was nimble. When a design failed, they changed course fast. When competitors shifted direction, Nvidia pivoted even faster. Huang cultivated this survival instinct, always reminding his team that in the world of technology, standing still meant death. One of the turning points came with Nvidia's Riva 128 graphics chip in 1997. This time, Nvidia stuck to a focused design, aligning with industry standards like Microsoft's DirectX. The Riva 128 was powerful, efficient, and affordable. It quickly gained popularity among gamers and PC enthusiasts. For the first time, Nvidia had a product that wasn't just surviving, it was competing head-to-head with bigger players. But even then, the company was walking a tightrope. The success of one product didn't guarantee stability. Nvidia had to keep innovating, year after year, or risk being left behind. The struggle was far from over, but the Riva series proved that Nvidia had the resilience to stay in the game. This chapter is a reminder that every great success story includes moments of near collapse. Nvidia's survival in the mid-1990s wasn't just about technology. It was about leadership, persistence, and the refusal to quit when everything seemed lost. For Jensen Huang, these years hardened his philosophy. To win in technology, you must always stay hungry, never relax, and constantly reinvent yourself. That mindset became the backbone of Nvidia's rise. Chapter 4: Gaming Glory. After years of trial, error, and near collapse, Nvidia finally found its footing in the late 1990s. The release of the Riva 128 in 1997 gave the company credibility, but what came next would transform Nvidia from just another chipmaker into a true powerhouse in the gaming industry. This was the era of GeForce, the series that would make Nvidia a household name. By the late 1990s, video games were no longer simple 2D experiences. Developers were pushing into immersive 3D worlds, filled with realistic environments, fast-paced action, and cinematic graphics. Gamers wanted speed, detail, and smooth performance. But the problem was clear. Traditional CPUs couldn't keep up with the graphical demands of these new games. The market was screaming for better graphics hardware, and Nvidia was listening. In 1999, Nvidia released the GeForce 256, which they boldly called the world's first GPU, Graphics Processing Unit. Unlike earlier graphics cards, which mainly acted as assistants to the CPU, the GeForce 256 was a revolutionary step forward. It could handle transformations, lighting, and rendering all on its own, offloading massive workloads from the CPU. For gamers, this meant smoother graphics, higher frame rates, and more realistic visuals. The launch of the GeForce series was a defining moment. It wasn't just a technical win, it was a branding triumph. Nvidia wasn't just selling chips anymore. It was selling an experience, a promise of power and performance. Gamers began to look for the Nvidia logo when buying computers, and developers optimized games to take advantage of Nvidia's technology. But Nvidia's rise in gaming wasn't just about one product. It was about the culture Jensen Huang built. He understood that in the gaming industry, technology moves fast. Today's breakthrough is tomorrow's outdated relic. So, he pushed his team to keep innovating, to release new versions of GeForce faster than competitors could respond. This relentless pace made Nvidia a moving target, difficult for rivals to catch. At the same time, Huang was building Nvidia's reputation as a company willing to take risks. While some chipmakers focused on cutting costs or playing it safe, Nvidia invested heavily in research and development, always betting on the future. That strategy often felt risky, spending millions on designs that might not work. But when it paid off, the rewards were enormous. The GeForce series quickly became the standard for high-performance gaming PCs. Nvidia's chips powered some of the most iconic games of the early 2000s, from first-person shooters to massive role-playing games. For gamers, Nvidia wasn't just a brand, it was the key to unlocking new worlds. This success had another impact: money. Nvidia's profits soared, giving the company the financial stability it had lacked in its early years. With stronger revenue, Nvidia could afford to invest even more in technology, creating a cycle of innovation that kept it ahead of the pack. However, what makes this chapter fascinating is that Jensen Huang wasn't satisfied. While most CEOs would have been thrilled to dominate the gaming market, Huang saw gaming as just the beginning. To him, GPUs weren't just entertainment devices, they were a new form of computing engine. In his mind, the GPU's ability to handle parallel processing, doing thousands of small calculations at once, meant it could be used for much more than games. Scientific simulations, artificial intelligence, data analysis, all of these fields could benefit from the same technology. While Nvidia was enjoying its gaming glory, Huang was already planning the next leap. This chapter captures the turning point where Nvidia proved it wasn't just a survivor, it was a leader. The gaming world gave Nvidia fame and fortune, but to Huang, it was also a stepping stone towards something much bigger. Chapter 5: Building the Dream. From Vision to Reality. Every great invention begins as a vision, something invisible, fragile, and existing only in the inventor's imagination. But transforming that vision into reality is the most difficult part. In this chapter, the author takes us into the journey of how brilliant minds manage to turn their wild, almost unbelievable ideas into working machines that would go on to change the world. The early pioneers of artificial intelligence and computing did not just sit in comfortable offices with huge budgets. Many of them were outsiders, tinkerers, dreamers who worked late into the night, often with very little funding or recognition. They were driven by curiosity and a belief that the impossible could be made possible. They wanted to create a machine that could not only calculate numbers, but also think in its own way. One of the most striking parts of this chapter is how many of these innovators faced rejection. Universities laughed at their proposals, companies refused to invest, and even fellow scientists often criticized them for being unrealistic. But instead of giving up, these pioneers took rejection as motivation. They built small prototypes, sometimes using second-hand parts, and showed the world glimpses of what was coming. The author also explains how these early experiments were not smooth at all. Computers in the mid-20th century were massive, room-sized machines that made a lot of noise, heated up quickly, and often broke down. Programming them required endless patience because one small mistake could crash the entire system. But despite these difficulties, the scientists kept going. This chapter makes you realize that building the future is never easy. For every success, there were dozens of failures. Yet, those failures were not wasted. They were stepping stones. Each error taught the inventors something new, bringing them closer to their ultimate goal. Another important theme in this chapter is collaboration. No one person built the thinking machine alone. It required groups of people, often from different parts of the world, working together and learning from each other. Some were experts in mathematics, others in physics, while some focused on language and logic. Chapter also touches on the financial and political side of building new technology. Governments and corporations began to realize the power of computing, not just for science, but also for defense, business, and communication. Suddenly, what was once seen as a hobby for eccentric scientists became a global race. Countries wanted to be first to create the smartest machines, pouring money into research labs. This competition, while sometimes politically charged, accelerated progress. The narrative here is inspiring because it shows that innovation is not a straight road. It is full of setbacks, doubts, and even ridicule, but those who stick to their vision, even when the world doesn't believe in them, eventually prove everyone wrong. Chapter 6: Cracking the Code. By this stage in the story, the rise of digital music has gone from a niche idea to a real storm sweeping across the globe. But for digital music to truly spread, it needed something that would solve a critical problem: file size. Raw audio files were massive, sometimes taking up more storage than an average computer could even handle in the 1990s. For people to actually trade music online, they needed a format that compressed songs without ruining the quality. This is where the MP3 file stepped into the spotlight. The MP3 wasn't just another audio file. It was a revolution. Behind it stood years of research by scientists like Karl-Heinz Brandenburg, who had spent countless nights trying to figure out how to shrink audio without losing the richness of music. His big idea was based on the science of human hearing. Instead of saving every single sound, the MP3 focused only on the sounds that the human ear could actually notice. For example, if a loud drum beat masked a softer background instrument, the computer could throw away the softer sound because most people wouldn't hear it anyway. This perceptual coding became the backbone of the MP3. At first, not everyone was impressed. Many record companies and audio experts dismissed MP3s as low quality compared to CDs. But the younger crowd, college students, early internet users, and computer geeks, saw something powerful. A whole song that once needed 50 megabytes could now be squeezed into 4 or 5 megabytes. That meant songs could actually be shared by email, uploaded to websites, or stored on a computer's hard drive. Suddenly, the dream of carrying thousands of songs on a single machine didn't sound impossible anymore. This chapter also highlights how quickly the underground music-sharing culture adopted MP3. Before big platforms like Napster appeared, there were smaller communities where people secretly uploaded and swapped music files. These weren't slick apps, but messy forums, bulletin boards, and early websites where curious people hunted for the newest format. The MP3 became the secret handshake of internet music fans. If you knew about it, you had access to a new world. But with this rise came a new kind of chaos. Record labels, who had always controlled how music was sold and distributed, were completely unprepared. Their business model was built on CDs costing $15 or more. And suddenly, here was a technology that allowed the exact same song to fly across the internet for free. To them, this wasn't just piracy. It was an existential threat. Witt describes the battle that began to form. On one side, you had passionate scientists and curious hackers who believed music should be freed from the grip of giant corporations. On the other side, you had the music industry clinging to its old systems and refusing to accept that the internet had changed the rules. This clash wasn't just about technology. It was about culture, freedom, and the meaning of ownership in the digital age. Chapter 7. The Man Behind the Machine. In this chapter, the focus shifts to the intense competition between tech companies and individuals who are racing to develop smarter, faster, and more capable AI systems. By now, the book has shown us how AI is not just a scientific curiosity, but a force that is changing industries, governments, and even personal lives. Chapter 7 digs deeper into the corporate and ethical battlefield of AI. The narrative describes how powerful corporations pour billions into research, hiring the brightest minds and building enormous data centers. These companies are not just trying to make machines think. They are competing for dominance in what many call the new oil, data. Whoever controls data and the algorithms to process it controls the future. The author highlights how this chase for supremacy creates both innovation and conflict. At the same time, the chapter touches on ethical dilemmas. For example, should AI be used to manipulate consumer choices, predict human behavior, or even replace entire categories of workers? There is a tension between progress and responsibility. The author paints a picture of researchers who are passionate about discovery, but also aware that their inventions might cause harm if placed in the wrong hands. We also see how governments begin to take notice. AI is no longer just a business tool. It has national security implications. Countries realize that whoever leads in AI could control global power dynamics. This sparks a global race, not unlike the nuclear arms race, but far more subtle and complex. By the end of the chapter, readers are left with a sense of urgency. AI is not simply about building smarter machines. It is about deciding what kind of future humanity wants and who gets to shape it. Chapter 8. The Race of Machines. By the time the world entered the late 20th century, machines had begun to outpace human ability in ways people had never imagined. The story in this chapter highlights how computers, once thought of as lifeless calculators, started to prove they could think faster and more accurately than humans. A turning point came when engineers began programming machines to play strategic games like chess. These games were not just entertainment. They represented complex decision-making, foresight, and logic, qualities once considered uniquely human. One of the most fascinating aspects of this period was the growing tension between pride in human intelligence and the awe of machine efficiency. When IBM's Deep Blue beat Garry Kasparov, the world champion in chess, it was more than a victory of machine over man. It was a signal that the boundaries of intelligence were shifting. People began asking, if a machine can learn chess, what else can it learn? Could it one day replace human reasoning altogether? The chapter doesn't frame this development as a simple man versus machine story. Instead, it presents it as a race, not only to build smarter technology, but also to understand what that technology means for human identity. Are we losing our uniqueness, or are we unlocking new tools to expand our capabilities? Chapter 9. The Human Factor. This chapter shifts the spotlight from machines and numbers back to people. Throughout the book, Stephen Witt has shown how algorithms and computers reshaped industries, but here he reminds us that behind every thinking machine are real humans making choices. Technology may calculate, but people still decide what to build, how to use it, and what risks to take. Witt illustrates this by showing how even the most advanced systems can fail if people misunderstand or misuse them. For example, a financial model might predict profits, but if bankers grow overconfident, they could ignore hidden dangers. The 2008 financial crisis is one of those reminders. Machines crunched the numbers, but human greed and overtrust in models magnified the disaster. The chapter also looks at ethics. Just because we can program a machine to act in certain ways doesn't mean we always should. Algorithms that recommend music or videos may seem harmless, but they can also trap people in narrow bubbles or spread harmful content. The question isn't only about what machines can do, but what humans allow them to do. At the same time, Witt balances this with optimism. Machines extend human abilities, but they don't erase the need for judgment, creativity, or empathy. A computer might recognize a pattern, but it's a person who asks, is this fair? Is this safe? Does this help society? In the end, this chapter reminds us that technology is never separate from humanity. Machines may think, but it is human values, ambitions, and flaws that steer them. The human factor remains the most important part of the equation. Geopolitics and challenges. As Nvidia rose, so did tensions in the world of technology. Most of Nvidia's chips were manufactured in Taiwan by TSMC. That made the company vulnerable to US-China tensions. Governments started to realize that whoever controls chips controls the future. Suddenly, Nvidia wasn't just a business. It was part of the global power struggle. AI and the future. The book ends by looking at where this is all heading. Nvidia is now one of the world's most valuable companies. AI is spreading into every corner of life: healthcare, defense, entertainment, and more. But there are also risks: inequality, job loss, and the possibility of misuse. Huang remains optimistic but cautious, always reminding that technology is a tool. It depends on how humans use it. Final takeaway. At its core, the thinking machine is about vision and persistence. Jensen Huang didn't just build chips, he built a new way of thinking about computing. The lessons for us: always think beyond the obvious. Don't be afraid of long-term bets. Great leaders combine technical genius with fearless risk-taking. And above all, resilience matters more than talent alone. Nvidia's story shows how a small company with a bold vision can reshape the entire world.